Okay. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to share with you guys my capstone called Packing in a Panic Safeguarding Museum Collections in Wartime. Oops. Okay. So, I chose this topic for a few reasons. I am intrigued by any kind of transportation and packing of objects because it's high stakes, and something is so cool to me about objects not being where they should be. I also chose this topic because I love heroic stories in wartime. Um, and I really consider any participant in what I discussed today a hero. And lastly, by my love, I chose this topic because of my love of the Louvre. I've been going there since I was little, and it's just it's a favorite museum of mine. A few years ago, I saw a photo of my favorite art piece, the Winged Victory of Samothrace, which is this art piece being wheeled down the Darrow staircase, and I just had chills. I told myself that one day I would do research on what was going on because all I knew just from the caption at the time was that it was being removed before World War II, and I really just needed to know um, what ended up happening and what happened from at the Louvre during the war. It never even occurred to me what happens during wartime in museums. So I figured now was the perfect opportunity to explore that, but also bring it into present day, of course. So my focus is on safeguarding museum collections, and showing why it's important in the first place to protect them, and how it impacts the memory of a culture. So by showing the gravity of this, applying real wartime examples, which will be the Louvre in World War II, and then various Ukrainian museums in the current Russia-Ukraine war, and then offering recommendations for developing a plan for evacuation and protection can help mitigate future um, historical loss. So, really, saving um, cultural heritage is saving a culture's history. And then this leads straight into the idea of cultural memory. Culture is not simply held within the people and their traditions, but also in the objects that are held inside museums. And people often go to museums, whether they realize it or not, to find a point of connection to each other, their community or country, and even their ancestry. Um, and this is powerful because it's been identified by aggressors since even before the Holocaust that if they were to attack and destroy heritage, it's an extremely effective way to begin to um, begin to erase the history and therefore memory of a people. My mom was born and raised in Romania, which was at the time taken over by communism, and she remembers the soldiers removing all of the king's statues, and the dictator, his name was Ceausescu. He was seizing all the palaces and the castles. So Romanian cultural institutions were being replaced by Russian ones. Um, so that's just one example. But so when people can't see their own history anymore, they begin to lose their identity. And this is what's at stake when museums are under the threat of war. And you can see here to the right, you can see the local Lore Museum in Mariupol, Ukraine, has completely been destroyed. Their local traditions that have been passed down for generations, it's just completely gone. So of course, before the Ukraine war came World War II. I had the privilege of visiting the archives of the Louvre and Palace of Versailles this January for my research, and they were able to show me how they protected their collections during World War II. They did it both in very different ways, and I'll share just a little of my Versailles findings in another part of the presentation. But For the Louvre, sorry, for the Louvre, what's important to note about them is that their operations, headed by the French director of National Museums, Jacques Jaujard, uh, it was really the first example of successful safeguarding in war times, and it just acted as um, examples for future museums in wartime. And they had suspicions of an invasion and began to collect appropriate packing materials. There are documents showing that conservators did lots of research on what materials would work best. Their usual manufacturers had began to choose allegiance to the Vichy French government and did not want to help them, so they had to make do with what they have and also find new packing options. And so as not to create suspicions, they closed the gallery, their some of most of their galleries under the guise of repairs, and then they began to um, remove and pack their collections. So there are a lot of takeaways from the Louvre during World War II. They demonstrate great examples on how to deal with tricky objects, such as oversized paintings. I mean, to the left is Raft of Medusa. That's a huge painting, if you know that one. Um, Extremely heavy and fragile sculptures. Uh, the Winged Victory of Samothrace is in so many pieces, and it's over 30 tons. It's so heavy. Um, and then, of course, Mona Lisa. That's an object that is of great importance to their nation. So it gives great examples of how they were able to deal with just overall tricky objects during war. And then the Louvre also demonstrates the importance of preparation and collaboration. And then throughout the war, they worked with a lot of allies, such as the Monuments Men. I actually recently met with the Monuments Men Foundation just for something else, but I got to talk to them a little bit with what they did during this. So they worked with them, and then they also collabed with civilians who owned chateaus, who held objects there, um, and then just a lot of other things. They really knew that fire was probably going to be their big issue, and so they took a lot of precautions with that. Okay, so moving on to the Russia-Ukraine war, which is the current war. Russia has actually had conflict with Ukraine before in 2014, in which they had historical loss. So their conflict picked back up in 2022. And unfortunately, they have already had major losses again, especially with smaller museums. And you would think that because they have been in this position before, they would have had better emergency preparedness. But however, Ukrainian museums have had a lot stacked against them. They were coming out of COVID, and many museums used their funding for putting collections online and engaging with the public virtually. And the funding with Ukrainian museums is already very limited, and only state-owned museums are given regular funding. So it really is kind of an every man for themselves situation. But even before the pandemic and before the war, they weren't given much attention and appreciation. And from Ukraine's perspective, Russia's reason for invasion is to eventually absorb Ukraine, so they can so they're basically intentionally attacking and destroying their cultural institutions. So it makes it all the more harder to protect their collections. Um, and a lot of museums have just basically abandoned their collections from the start. And from my research, the overall attitude of many museum staff has just been like defeat and hopelessness, just going into the war. which is pretty sad. Um, Ukraine also heard of some rumblings of some sort of attack, but were just extremely unprepared. They didn't have anything updated or materials ready. They were able to protect a lot of their monuments, which was good because they did have a lot of them really that they were really valued. Um, so while the preparation was not good, the one thing that Ukrainians did excel in was triage and resourcefulness after the fact, and also technology. Um, After damage was done, they did very well assessing what can be saved and moving quickly. They've utilized so many aid organizations, pretty much like all of the ones that was offered to them, like Blue Shield and also the Aleph Foundation, who's written a lot of grants for them. They've also done so much with technology. They've set up a monitor surveillance lab where they can see where looting is happening. They can fly drones um, um, over there to check on certain buildings, things like that. They're also starting to do this cool thing where they're 3D scanning the area of destroyed monuments and museums, and they're taking the original rubble of it, and putting the pieces back together in construction sites right next to it. Um, and they've done a collaboration with Uber, and now museums can call an Uber, and conservators can come. Museums can call an Uber, and the Uber has a conservator in it, and the conservators can come to the site and repair objects that are too fragile. So that's cool. So again, a lot of the good work they're doing, a lot of their strengths are after the damage. Um, and again, because they don't have good funding, um, they've developed a really well stay in place protection methods, which I think will serve as a great example for museums who have low budgets. So informed by what we learned from examples of the Louvre and Ukrainian museums, I have created recommendations for museums to create their own guidebooks and plans should they find themselves in a wartime scenario. It is broken down by sections. This is just like some of the sections, but um, and it's starting from how to decide which objects are of priority, and then in each section, I analyze which example uh, did did the best job at it. Um, and down at the bottom, I have like a key of it. But my archive visit to the Palace of Versailles allowed me to demonstrate how museums can protect collections that are immovable. And it's pretty neat because they have both an indoor and an outdoor collection. Um, and then the last part of my capstone is a checklist, which is just another way to put the planning portion of the last slide um, more into motion. And this is just a section of that checklist so museums can. Um, this is just one part of that checklist. So when it comes to the evacuation part, these are things that museums would want to look at when they're removing an object.
About 1 minute, Abby.
Okay. So, going into this research, my assumptions were that, yes, of course, save the museums, but more kind of from my own love of museums. I knew that saving history was important, but now I understand the idea of cultural memory and just how incredibly vital it is to have the tangible material, and also how much impact attacking museums have on communities and how much they rely on visiting them, and just the idea of the triggering of memories. Um, and so the final takeaways are that when you're safeguarding collections in wartime, you're really protecting the memory of a culture. It's just so much deeper than save the art. And also, as we've seen, especially with Ukraine, museums have to drop a lot of their steps and formalities and really just think outside of the box. They have to be unconventional, and preparation will be a huge part of their success. Some things can't be foreseen, but many things can be planned ahead. I can also conclude that there's so many ways to protect collections that I couldn't even include here. And there's no one size fits all, but that leads to the key part that museums really need to create their own guidebook before any conflict happens, and that's also key. And that's it.